Hey, welcome back to the We Don't Know It All podcast. This is episode 4. Today we're going to talk a little bit about this book written by James Clear called Atomic Habits. Francisco and I are working through this right now as a staff, and so it's really touched us, and so we wanted to share some of our thoughts with you. It was a great conversation that we just had, and I really hope you enjoy it, so let's get into it.
Hey guys, so welcome back to the We Don't Know It All podcast. And today we're talking about a book that we've been reading, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Yeah. This is one of the books, Caden, that I've enjoyed the most. And there's certain books, I think, that you read once, but you don't mind picking it back up and reading it, because then you're whatever stage of life you're in, it's gonna affect you, or it's gonna sort of challenge you in a different way. And then if you read it a couple months later, it's going to be completely different. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I agree. I'm still working my way through the book, and we'll probably get into this a little more later, but like our staff is kind of, or at least our pastors on staff are reading the book right now. So this is the kind of, I noticed sustained for the first time. Love that. This is the first time that I am reading through the book. So I'm about halfway through now because we're still going through it as a staff. I know you read it about a year ago. Yeah. So, but I 100% see what you're saying. Like this is a super easy read. I think I'll probably pick it back up in about a year or two, just to go through it again.
Before we get into the meat of the book, I'm going to tell you this. If you're not a person that normally reads books, you need to start. You need to start. And so this whole book is about habits and developing good habits that lead you to achieving goals that you have. But the habit of reading a book can completely shift and change your life. And you're probably like, well, I've never finished a book in my life. Start small. I'm not saying start with this particular book, but start small. Start with something that, that connects with you. If you pick up a book and if you're bored 2 chapters in, drop it and pick another book. It's okay. Yeah. That's okay. So I'm definitely going to encourage you, definitely read a book, because that can really transform. They do say that is the cheapest way to gain knowledge, cheapest and fastest way to gain knowledge.
I've never heard that, truthfully, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah, think about it. So like all the stuff that James Clear had to go through to learn everything that he then pours into this book for us to read, like we've just gained years from our lives. We could have eventually at some point gotten to these points, into these nuggets of gold that but what I'm trying to say here is, reading a book, and let's say you finish it in 2 weeks, that's like you've just taken giant leaps to where you want to be in life.
Absolutely. And if you're not a reader, but you would like to be one, and maybe you don't know where to start, maybe you don't know what books to read, feel free to. Neither Francisco nor I are book experts, as they say. But we've read enough that we probably have at least one recommendation in multiple genres: fiction, nonfiction, self-help, spirituality. So if you don't know what book to pick up first, feel free to reach out, comment on any of our posts. We'll make sure to help you out there.
For sure. All right, so diving right into the book and the content of the book. The whole book is about developing habits, developing these steps to get you to where you want to be, to understanding how the human self works, to how positive habits can lead to good things, and then negative habits can lead to bad things, and how sometimes focusing on just the goal could be bad. Yeah. Because that's so short-lived. So the whole part of the big premise of the book is that the moment that you reach your goal, that euphoria or that moment of happiness, that energy that is a positive energy, you're like, yes, I've achieved it, is so short-lived that then you forget. You forget why you wanted to do the goal, and not only that, but sometimes you could regress.
Yeah. Well, and he goes into the science of it at one point. I think it's in... I want to say the book's divided into 4 laws for reference, and I want to say it's in the first law, but I could be wrong. But he talks about how like our brain releases dopamine when, I mean, that's always been a big thing, like the dopamine and pleasure and whatever. But I've never heard it referenced in regard to habits.
Yeah.
And he says scientifically proven that your body releases just as much, if not more, dopamine before the habit actually takes place.
Yeah.
Before the action, before it's almost the anticipation of the action that provides the dopamine.
Yeah.
Which I mean makes sense. Like if you're going to a concert or Disney World or whatever, like there's more excitement sometimes in the build up than there is like once you get there.
Yeah.
I mean it's super fun. I mean obviously like riding a roller coaster is fun. But the roller coaster lasted what? A minute? 90 seconds?
Legit, I think the longest roller coaster at, let's say, Disney World is like a minute and 35 seconds.
Yeah. And so it's like I'm fairly confident I'm not a scientist, but even the scientists say like the dopamine, the majority of the dopamine is released in anticipation to the event.
Right.
But anyways.
And that's why a big portion of this book is all about the systems that you develop while you're trying to achieve that goal. And if you don't develop, if you don't develop systems, then when you reach the goal, it's going to pretty much be meaningless to you. And because you didn't develop that system, then you're going to end up right back where you started.
Yeah.
Let's say one of your goals was to lose weight, right? If you don't develop a system, then you might reach that goal of losing those 20 pounds. But because there's no system in place, you're going to end up in a place where you're probably going to gain those 20 pounds and then some.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what this whole book is about.
Yeah.
And so developing small things, developing small habits that then take you to the next step, into the next step, into the next step. I'll say something, then I'll kind of let you chime in here, Caden. But I think one of the biggest things that I took from this book was that we see goals as like sort of the finish lines. And that was a big mind shift for me because I started seeing goals as just sort of mile markers to where I wanted to be. Yeah. So I'll develop these habits. I'll create a system on how to get to that goal. But the goal is never my finish line. The goal is never my end point. The goal is just I've reached this step. Now it's time to create another one and another one and another one. And that's how I've been able to create short-term goals and then long-term goals and then places where I want to be by the time I'm a certain age, and then places where I want to be by the time my kids are a certain age, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So it's all about creating systems, and it's all about creating goals, yes, but focus in on the fact that the goal is not your finish line. The goal is not the end. The goal is not like, okay, I've conquered it, I can do whatever I want to do now. You're gonna like end up going backwards if you really end up doing that.
Yeah. No, that's good. I think when I was reading through the book, I wasn't really sure. Honestly, here's the thing. Reading about habits, talking about habits, I understand the benefit in it, but it's never kind of been the topic of choice for me,
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know what I would get out of the book. I knew it was written well. Like, I mean, it's a #1 New York Times bestseller. So it's not like I didn't think the book was going to suck, but I just didn't know if I would really connect with the material or not.
Right.
And pretty off the bat, like there were multiple things that I was like, you know what, that's really good.
Yeah.
Like whether or not you're really, really intentionally studying, like how do I create and form better habits?
Right.
He's got a lot of, this is not his intent to be clear, but he's got a lot of one-liners that I'm like, that was really good.
That was good.
But he goes through this conversation about how like our senses can dictate our habits, but a lot of that begins with the environment around you.
Right.
And so he writes, environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior.
That's so good.
And then a couple pages later, when he's expounding upon like senses and how that affects things, he kind of focuses in on sight and how that like changes your habits. And he says, visual cues are the greatest catalyst of our behavior. For this reason, a small change in what you see can lead to a big shift in what you do.
That's wild.
And I think, by far, there's a couple other things I've highlighted, but up to this point, like I said, I'm only halfway through the book. Up to this point, that's kind of been my biggest takeaway from the book, is just how like our environment plays such a big part in the things that we do, the habits we find ourselves in, the habits that we want to produce.
Right.
Like you have to learn how to
Right.
shape your environment to help you rather
Yeah.
than hold you back, you know? So I think that's kind of where I've been
I
headed
mean,
with this.
1,000% right. Like the people you surround yourself with are going to affect where you're going and how fast you're going. You don't want to surround yourself with someone that's going to be full of negativity when you're trying to be more positive in life.
Yeah.
You don't want to surround yourself with someone that has no hunger to get to the next stage of life when you're trying to get to that next stage of life.
Yeah.
It's just all those things rub off on you, and they can have a profound effect on your mindset and how you go about things.
Yeah.
There's a really cool story in the book, and this is kind of like how the book launches off, but it talks about the cycling team from
British
England.
cycling
Yeah, the
team.
British,
Yeah, yeah.
cycling team. Now, they were so bad that literally, I mean, they were bad. It got to the point where literally manufacturers of these really high-end, bikes, they didn't want the British team riding their bikes because
Yeah.
they were losing constantly. So they would maybe draw parallels between the equipment and the team itself,
Yeah.
like the people riding the bikes. And so it talks about small things that they do to get better. And now the cycling team is a beast. They wanted to get to Neil Armstrong status, and so they started to do little things. And they start. It's crazy how tiny of a change they begin to do that then develops into this huge outcome, right?
Yeah.
So one of the first things that the book tells us that they do is they literally paint the back of the pickup truck where they carry the bikes a hyper white, so that they could tell if there was any extra dust that would then create weight
Yeah.
on the bikes. And you may say, that sounds completely insignificant. That's dumb. I mean, how is a little bit of dust going to slow But it's when you compound those small little changes that you're going to start to see a positive outcome.
Yeah.
So when we apply that to our lives, right, you're like, okay, I'm trying to get to this goal financially, right? And maybe you got to tell yourself, I got to quit it with the Starbucks one day out of the week. I'll do it the rest of the week, but I got to quit it one day out of the week. Well, you may see it as something significant or small, but that small change is then going to lead to, okay, this month, because I decided to not buy Starbucks for a week,
Yeah.
I saved $35. What if I did it two days out of the week, and so on and so on? So small changes that then compound
Yeah.
into a big change that develops positive habits, then lead you to maybe your goal of saving more money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I joked about this with you a couple days ago, but I don't know that for some reason, like the book's called Atomic Habits, and the subtitle, or one of the subtitles, says Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results. That sounds fairly self-explanatory.
Yeah.
For some reason, in my head, Atomic Habits, I was picturing like the atomic bomb. And so in my head, these were going to be like massive. I mean, they were going to lead to like huge results.
Yeah.
But I was picturing these massive changes in my lifestyle and
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But his whole, like, he starts off the book with, or he starts off early in the book with the story of the British cycling team, because he's trying to make the point
Yeah.
that like you don't have to be 100% better in one area overnight. What you need to be is 1% better in all these different areas that compound to make you better
Yeah.
than you've ever been before.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to rewire the way that we approach habits.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for a habit to seem exponentially more or harder
Right.
than it could ever be,
Right.
and or than we could ever become. And I think that we have to learn how to be okay with 1%
Yeah.
better in
Yeah.
all these different areas, because it adds together.
Here's a crazy one that's just popping into my head. There's a gentleman, and I'm totally blanking on his name, but this is the power of developing small habits that could lead to something big. I went through a leadership initiative back in 2019, the DeVos Leadership Initiative out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And one of the things that they like us to do is to begin journal, like a journal, and to journal, like just to keep track of what's happening in your life.
Yeah.
And the way they have a journaling system that's awesome and that I still use to this day. But there was this gentleman that he hated to journal. He hated to write anything. And so he hated it and hated it. But he started to do it once a week. And so then he started to fill in his journal, and then it became a thing that he couldn't put down.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where literally he is now a book writer. In the Spanish circles, right, in the Hispanic Latino culture, he's an amazing book writer, and I'm gonna find his name and I'll leave it down in the comments. But he went from someone who didn't like to write at all, to then developing this small habit and then growing that habit, and it became a goal of like, let me finish this book and I'm not gonna put it down. And so I've written everything that I can in every single page of this journal. So then now he's an author. Like, and that's crazy how you can go from 0 to 100 in small increments, but you could potentially get there. There's one thing that the book really like, it just spoke to me so much. And I'm trying to find it here because I have a ton of notes for this book. But it pretty much comes down to cognitive slumber. And it's never challenging the narrative. And so what happens when we develop cognitive slumber is when we've convinced ourselves that we're not good at something and we just write that off for the rest of our lives. Let's say you were horrible at math in high school, and you grow up with this notion of this narrative in your mind that I'm just never going to be good at math. But if you start challenging yourself little by little and changing that narrative and changing how your psyche works about that certain subject or that certain something that you feel like I'm never going to be good at, then next thing you know, you will be good at it. Next thing you know, you're going to be doing something crazy in that area that you have convinced yourself that you're not good at. So examine your life. Look at yourself and challenge yourself and say, like, is there something that I've told myself I am not good at and I'm never going to be good at it, that I could start chipping away and become better at it? Is there something that I could kind of shift my mindset on and say, I'm just not good at writing. I'm just not good at drawing. I'm just not good at, listening to podcasts and learning. I'm not good at reading books. Whatever it is, start chipping away at it and stop convincing yourself. This cognitive slumber that happens, stop convincing yourself that you're not good at it, because you might be really, really good at it and you might gain a bunch of benefit from it. Yeah.
I think kind of the last thing in the book that really stood out to me was it's at the beginning of Law 3 when he's kind of moved into the third law, and he's writing about the difference between motion and action, which I've never really thought much about, I guess. But his thing is, it's so easy for us to like have motion in our ideas and habits and think that we're doing super well. But then the actual action never takes place. So, for example, when we wanted to start this podcast, we did a lot of planning. There was motion. So, it felt like there was some progress. But the truth is, until we actually started recording episode 0, the podcast didn't exist. There
was nothing there.
And so we have such a bad habit. This is a bad habit of just about everyone, that there's something we want to implement, there's something we want to create, and we have all of this motion involved, which makes us feel like progress is happening, but there's no action implemented. And he writes, not that you care, but it's on page 142.
Let's go.
He says, but more often than not, we do it because motion allows us to feel like we're making progress without running the risk of failure. And I was like, that's
a crazy one.
That's so true, because there is no failure. There's no risk of failure in motion. At least when we're talking about like implementation and that kind of thing. That you can't fail something when all you're doing is planning it. And I do think that's probably not a one size fits all statement, but I do feel like a lot of the times one thing that probably holds me back is I hate failure. I understand logically that failure can propel you forward, but it doesn't make it fun, And so I think that for me personally, I think that stuck out to me so much because I do think sometimes I probably rely on motion more than action as this is what I need.
I think we all do because it's a safety net for us. It becomes a thing where it's like, I'm going to talk about this, but if it never happens, it never happens. And that's why I literally saw an Instagram post the other day saying, like, if you have big goals, don't tell anybody about them until they actually become real, because then you're just going to keep failing and failing and failing and failing. But to add to your point, one of the things that I highlighted in the book was this: habit formation begins with trial and error. you're gonna mess up at one point.
Yeah.
You're gonna want to get that Starbucks on the day you're not supposed to get the Starbucks. You're gonna put the book down when you're supposed to read to page 45 and you had planned to, you're gonna fail, but it's trial and error.
Yeah.
Just because you failed one doesn't mean that habit just all of a sudden is not gonna become a successful habit to then reach to your goal. You're gonna fail a bunch of times.
Yeah.
I still fail a bunch of times. My goal this year was to read 4 books a month. I'm nowhere near that, but I'm continuing to do that. I'm continuing to try to read more books. I'm continuing to ask people like, hey, what's the next book I should read? What am I, and I try to be more proactive in that sense. However, I'm still failing. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop. It's trial and error. It's trial and error. You're going to fail, but you got to keep going. You're going to fail, but you got to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's take it. I mean, I know this was all personal in the sense of like, this is what we personally got out of it, but on your personal habits currently, what did you notice about yourself, like habits, both good or bad, that you kind of, you began to see or were revealed as you were reading the book?
I think, I was doing a lot of that, a lot of motion and no action, a ton of that and no action. I was even planning out and writing things that just never took place. My YouTube channel, like literally, like it was just stopped for no reason.
Yeah.
I literally set up, if you ever get the chance to go to my house and check out my office, it's set up as a studio.
Yeah.
And I've automated everything to where you say, Alexa, turn on the studio lights, and it's got the right lights and right everything. However, nothing was happening.
Yeah.
And I was content with that motion. And I found out that I became content on a lot of things as long as there was a little bit of motion happening, but no action, like no actual like work to get me to my goal of like producing 1 YouTube video a week. But I was becoming content on a lot of my goals and just having a little bit of motion but no actual meat to the bone.
Yeah.
And so I started literally a list of things that I said I was going to do and I never did. And so I can pretty much tell you that every single item on the list had some kind of motion and meaningful motion, where I even invested money and I invested, things and I invested time and all these things. But however, I wasn't doing anything. So it kind of became this red alert. You have to do something, dude, because you've already spent all this money and you haven't done anything with it. And that was partially my wife telling me, when are you actually going to do something with the fancy light that you bought? Because it, what's happening.
Spouses tend to do that too.
What about you? Did you notice anything?
Well, one thing I noticed was that I don't keep good track of my habits to begin with. I don't know that I have a good idea of what I do habitually. And like I said, I tend to stay away from habit talks or habit books. And so this is one of the first ones that I've ever really worked through.
Yeah.
I started reading this book 6 days ago. Yeah, about 6 days ago, maybe even a little less, 5 days ago. And so because of that, like I've gotten about halfway through it, which is great, but I think I'm still trying to work through what some of my habits are. Particularly the bad ones, like those are the ones I'd like to work on. I do know, kind of like you, that I have a habit of staying in motion but not in action. But I've been that way my whole life. I don't know what started it, but I have a really bad habit of, like, maybe I'll dream about something I'd like to do. Maybe I'll go as far as planning out what it takes to get there. Maybe. But then I'm just not, like, I never tend to implement them. So I think that is a bad habit of mine. But on more like specific levels, more minutia, I'm not sure what my habits are. I've got to kind of work through some of that still. So
I'm a list guy. I make lists for everything, and then I just throw away the list. But I have to like get it out of here and make a list out of it. It's weird. But start working on those habits. Start working on tiny things that'll get you towards your goal. Start working on things that are gonna get you there. Stop the motion and actually get to the action. Because I'm telling you, think about it this way: this time next year, you could have accomplished a big goal of yours. And so I think that always gets me. There's this has nothing to do with the book, but and I want you to understand one thing, guys. we're like legit giving you 30,000 foot view of what this book is. Go read the book. There's 4 laws in there. They're gonna completely change your mind. It's an easy read. I mean, the way the chapters are laid out, it's a great book.
I read half the book, which is about 140, 150 pages, and I read that half in one sitting. I mean, and it's not. I mean, I do like to read, but that's not because I'm some great reader. You know, like it really is an easy to read book.
It's easy to go chapter after chapter, and it's easy to find yourself. Well, I want to get to the next meat of it, and I want to get to the next meat of it, and so on and so on. And then you find yourself, I don't know if this happened to you, but after like chapter 4 or 5, I'm like, oh, I want to go back to 1 because I want to see it now with the scope that now the book is revealing to me. But what I was going to say is I actually saw a calendar that shows your life in weeks. And it's, you know, based on the life expectancy and your current age. And you literally fill in the circle for the week that you've already lived. And I refuse to get that calendar. You know why? Because I would be so scared to look at it every day. Because there goes my life. And I'm like, I need to reach this goal, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. And maybe some of us need that little extra push of like, you're right here. You're not really that young anymore. And you've got to do something today. So that reminded me a lot of, like, as soon as I saw the calendar, I was like, okay, I need to really, you know, tackle some of my goals and start chipping away at some things, because things aren't going to happen overnight. The chances are of you solving your financial goals and getting there, you're not going to win the lottery. It's just not going to happen. So start doing it, because you might be young, but you're not that young.
Are there, this kind of my final question I have for you. If you've got any more questions, we'll keep going. But is there any goals that you would like to form after reading, either maybe after reading this book, or maybe this book just reinvigorated an idea you've already had? But are there any habits that you are now currently working on or would like to form?
You know, I've always, the whole point of my personal YouTube channel was to share information and knowledge. And so I strayed away from that so much, and I'm like, and now that I've kind of restarted it, I keep telling myself, you got to do it more, and you got to do it more. And because someone out there is going to send you that message, because I've received some really cool messages, and I'm like, you have to do it more, you have to do more. So it's reinvigorated in me, kind of like the whole share what God has taught you and share what God has entrusted you with that knowledge. And so that's happened. But here's the crazy part. Even though the book has absolutely nothing to do with the church world, it's reinvigorated in me of like, you have to share Jesus more with people. And how many people are you really touching, and how many people are you telling about Jesus? So I've now created a goal of how many people I want to talk to Jesus about this year. Like I've that's really stirred up in me. And it all started with, the YouTube channel, because I want to share what I've got, but I also want to share not just my knowledge of holding a camera, but my knowledge of being a believer in Christ. And so that stirred that up in me. And I'm like, I need to, like, it's more than just like a financial goal. It's like I have a sense of urgency of this needs to happen. I've got to start tackling at this, because I've not done enough to reach those goals. What about you? Is there like a goal that you put in pause, or like something that you were like, it was in the back of my head, and as soon as I started reading this book, it just like red alarms? And
well, for a long time, doing a podcast was a goal for me. And I didn't know where to start or really what to do or how to do it. And so I kind of put it off for a long time. And then when you and I started talking about it, then that kind of reinvigorated some things. But the book itself made me rethink the way we approach the podcast a little bit, and how, like, there's been times where we'd have like, oh, we're going to record an episode today, and then had to move it. And then, or what, like, are there things that we want to do long term with it? And are we doing anything to make that happen? Or are we just talking about it in each other's offices? You know, so it's things like that I've been rethinking. And so what I'm trying to do now is, okay, how do I build systems into my weekly schedule, or moments into my weekly, I guess that is the system. How do I build moments into my weekly schedule that allow for even this podcast, for us to like grow deeper and make it the best it could be, you know? And so I'm working through that. Other ones are like health goals. So like I want to, well, truthfully, this is actually in the opposite of what he talks about doing. But I have like a goal of losing some weight. I don't have a specific number. I just would like to lose some weight. Right. And so right now I'm counting calories because Andrew Fernandez inspired me. So I'm doing
Shout out to Andrew Fernandez.
Yeah. So I'm working through some of these principles on how to get there.
Yeah.
But still building that. That's been a last minute as of like last night. So I'm still building through some of those things.
Let's go. That's awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. We've loved sharing this with you. And again, we're giving you 30,000 foot view. Go read the book. Go pick it up. It's a great read. It's an amazing author. It's just crazy the way he breaks things down to so that you can absorb as much of this information as possible. You're gonna love it. And if you're like literally, if you've never picked up a book, hit us up. We've got a couple suggestions for you. We'd love to put you on the right path. And then maybe the next podcast or one of the future podcasts could be about that habit itself, because I've gotten to the point where, I don't know if you're like me, but I actually sometimes can read up to 3 books at the same time. But there's a, and I'll share that in the future, but there's a system that I have in place that allows me to retain the knowledge so that I can read 3 books at the same time.
That'll be a future episode.
I'm not that smart, guys. I'm going to clear that up. I am not that smart to be reading 3 books at the same time and regain knowledge. There's a system that I have that allows me to digest all the information. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. We are enjoying this journey a ton. Thank you for the love. Thank you for the support. We've received some great messages. We didn't know how people were going to receive these podcasts, but it seems like people are liking them, or they're being very nice to us. And
they could be lying to our face, but we'll take it, honestly.
Guys, thank you so much. We hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on the next one.
Peace.
Bye.